You're listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks, a biblical, practical, and spiritual conversation about living and leading worship. Visit kurtisparks.com to learn more and check out Kurtis's books and latest resources for your worship team. Worshipology is a part of the Worship Leader Magazine podcast network. Worship Leader Magazine has a heart to equip spirit-led worship leaders with practical tools, theological insight, and encouragement for the local church. This episode is brought to you by Crossway, publisher of the Sing Hymnal, curated by Keith and Kristen Getty. This hymnal hosts a collection of timeless classic and contemporary hymns created to deepen corporate worship, liturgical readings, psalms paired with popular hymns, and stories about each hymn, along with the durable, scuff-resistant cover and sewn binding, make this resource perfect for frequent use in church services. Visit crossway.org/churchworship to learn how to get up to 60% off case quantities of the hymnal with a free Crossway Plus account. Now, lean into today's episode of Worshipology with Kurtis Parks.
Well, hey, thanks so much for listening to the Worshipology podcast. This is a biblical, practical, spiritual conversation all about living and leading worship. And really excited about today because not only is she a worship leader, worship pastor, she's done a lot of things in ministry, but also in the marketplace and business world. We're going to get some tips on leadership. We're going to talk about people development. It's going to be an amazing conversation. Maribeth Dodd, say what's up to Worshipology.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Kurtis. I'm so excited to be here. I feel like I'm with my people here. I love it.
Let's go. Let's go. Well, I mean, I'm just so excited to chat with you today. And I know God's got some amazing things in store for this conversation. And, I was just kind of reading up on your bio this morning. It's kind of an incredible story. I feel like you're just getting started. And that's always the cool thing about ministry. The best is always yet to come. But just for our listeners, Maribeth, why don't you just tell them like a little bit of who you are? How'd you get started, not just in ministry, but in worship leading, and then what was it that made you to kind of feel called to take that leap into the business sector and now doing stuff in marketplace and in church ministry?
Yeah. Okay. So much to unpack there. So I'll try to make it concise. I started to feel a call to ministry super young. I was 14 when I really felt like I want to be in full-time ministry. I don't know if I knew exactly what that would look like, but I also did music and really, ended up studying music in college. And during that time, it was kind of the beginning of what we call the worship movement, and so I was studying classical in my classes by day, and learning opera. And then I did an internship and began to lead worship at a church that was doing stuff like Darlene's Shack. And, just when like Matt Redman was starting to come around, I don't even think the Passion movement was going yet. Like it was just very, very early on in that. And that just tugged at my heart. And then, at the end of college, I had a decision to make. I had a scholarship to continue on in classical music, and I could go sort of that performance route. Or there was a church in Atlanta, Georgia that said, hey, would you come interview for a worship pastor position? And at the time, honestly, Kurtis, women weren't doing that yet either. Like it was, I knew one worship leader, there was a woman, and it was Darlene. Like that was it.
Wow.
So I was like, all right, I'll interview. Let's just see what happens. Maybe it'll be good practice or something. I don't know. And so I flew into, Atlanta, Georgia, and was prepping for this interview. And they sent this really handsome man to pick me up for the interview from the hotel to take me to this dinner and everything, and ended up marrying him. So that's how I met my husband, Chris.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so, but here's the deal. Like I remember that night going in, and I had dinner with sort of the search team. And then we went into the sanctuary, and they wanted me to sing something. And I just sat at the piano and sang a couple worship songs. And it was like the Holy Spirit was so heavy in that room. Like I still remember the feeling. And just throughout our time there, we continued to worship. The pastor was a great piano player too. He sat down at the keyboard. We just sat there and worshiped for at least an hour. And I just remember everybody was in tears. Like it was just one of those moments, and I left there thinking, whoa, this is the direction I'm going. And this is the easiest decision I've ever made in my entire life. Like it was not hard. I remember calling that school and saying, I'm not coming. You can give the scholarship to somebody else, and then just taking and just doing the scariest thing ever as a single 22-year-old moving by myself to Atlanta, Georgia. and taking that position, and really, I'm so thankful that God gave me, the pastors that were there, Nate and Tammy Nielsen, as like mentors for me in ministry and leadership and people skills. So many things I learned under their mentorship while I was there. And then, of course, eventually got married to Chris, and he felt a pull to ministry as well. And we moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and we lived there for 9 years. Yeah, big move.
Wow.
And so that was great. Really enjoyed it. Led worship there for a church that was about a year old when we got there, and got to see it through, many years of setup and tear down, getting into a building, a lot of life, and just incredible. We had 3 of our boys there. So we have 4 sons, by the way.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Now, are any of them in music now?
Actually, they've all done some form of music in one way or another. But our 16-year-old is very interested in music and production. So that's kind of the direction he's pointing himself in right now. But yeah, so that was just, I guess, kind of the foundation and the start of everything is in my career as a worship pastor, and then I kind of got to the place where I really had this just interest in business, that started. And I started kind of several little side things. I did an online boutique, and I sold some health and wellness products. And I just did various things, and found out as much as I didn't want that to be a distraction from my ministry in any way, there was this weird pull. And it was like I was kind of accidentally successful in that world, Wow. And I was taking my ministry skill set and applying it to business.
Wow.
And come to find out, those are not all that different skill sets.
Yeah,
exactly.
Talk a little bit about that. Like maybe unpack that, because, and I know I want to hear more of your story, how you went from Atlanta to Phoenix. And of course, now you're in the Nashville area. I want to hear about that. But let's pause there for a second, because I think, there's this huge wall that people put up where it's like, oh, they're called to ministry. They work at a church, and I'm not really called to ministry because I work, in the corporate sector or in a factory or I'm at Target or I'm, anything, a teacher in a school. Like, talk a little bit about that and how, like you just said, those worlds really aren't that different.
Right. Yeah. And that was a big learning curve for me, to be honest, because I felt called to ministry so young. I felt like it was a very specific calling within the church. And so as I started to dip into the world a little bit more, and really for the first time as an adult, I was getting into the world a little bit. And I remember people coming to me and just with really honest things about their life struggles and things that were happening that they weren't telling me when they were seeing Pastor Maribeth. They were telling me when they just saw this lady that was selling this thing or whatever, and that was really eye-opening for me. And it kind of called me back to a time when I was really young, and I had this really burning passion for evangelism, especially middle school time is what I think of. I knew I was on this earth to help draw people to Christ. And I had gotten to do that from a stage and a worship leading perspective and in small groups and some of those things. But this was different, and our pastor now says it like this. He's like, we can't reach everybody as staff people at the church, but you all can, know? And so it doesn't matter what business you're in, you are in ministry. This is all of our calling. So you can plug me in anywhere and I'm going to know it's the same. And it took me a while to get to that place, Kurtis, because when I stepped out of having the title and being in full-time ministry, that was hard for me. And I had to then wrestle with who really am I as a daughter of God and what is my calling? And it turns out it never changed.
What's interesting is that the Great Commission, it's not like a pick and choose when it comes to the Great Commission. That's for every believer in Christ. And I think you're right. People will, for better, for worse, people put up this wall when you're in full-time ministry. I don't know if I could tell a pastor that, or I don't know if I can, I actually had a friend who wasn't walking with the Lord, and he's like, I don't know if I can step foot in church. I'll spontaneously combust, but it was like when I wasn't leading worship and I was just hanging out, it's like, oh, maybe I'll open up a little bit more of my world and a little bit more of my journey and my struggle to somebody that I don't necessarily see as a pastor, a preacher, a teacher, somebody who's over a ministry per se. And I think there's something beautiful in that. You talked about evangelism being a call. How does that look when it comes to leading worship? And I say that with this caveat, Maribeth, I think oftentimes worship leaders because we are in a public platform, we let that be our excuse to be evangelists. Oh, I'm doing it 30 minutes a week on stage. And we don't let that trickle into the 6 days and 22 hours outside of church. That's really what life is. So talk to us a little bit about, and maybe encourage and challenge us a little bit on that, how we think evangelism plays out in our everyday life. But, how did that kind of manifest as you were leading worship, and then now kind of more in the business world?
That's such a good question. And like, as you're saying that, I look back and I'm like, man, there's some years where I wish I would have thought this way sooner, or just taken the time to think it through and invest in different ways. As a staff person, I was so engulfed in what we were doing in the church, I couldn't even think outside of those walls. And you're right, Kurtis. I think I would use it as an excuse to think like, oh, I'm doing it. I'm encouraging people in the Lord. And we had somebody come to the altar this last weekend, accept Christ, like stuff like that, where you're like, oh, I'm a part of this thing. But I wasn't out having those conversations. And that was one of the first things I realized when I started to dip into the world a little more in business. And I remember saying this to my husband. At first, he was like, honey, maybe you shouldn't say that. I'm like, sorry, it's true. But I was like, I've actually helped to walk more people through accepting Christ in business than I did in the church world.
Come on. Wow.
So, I mean,
wow.
I know. And he was like, honey, careful. I'm like, I get it. But this is the reality. When we come to church, most of those people already know the Lord. So from an evangelistic standpoint, and it's still, all that work is so, so important. Don't get me wrong. I still think it's so important. We've got to do it. We got to be together as believers, got to encourage each other, all of those things. But when I was out in the world and I'd come across people that actually literally didn't know him, and I was able to say, like, here's what he did in my life, and like be able to do that. So, I mean, I've been at business conferences where we have baptized people. I've been in places where I sat with somebody in the front row after a sales presentation and prayed for them to accept the Lord. Like, you never know what God's going to do with you when you're just willing. And in some ways, I went into that world kicking and screaming because I wanted to hang on to some of the other stuff that I loved so much. And he's like, but I also need you to do this,
Wow. I think the cool thing is that when you're walking with the Lord and you're hearing the Holy Spirit as you do, you're able to see fruit in a new way. It's like, I think that was kind of part of our story, Maribeth, was, we moved to Nashville out of DC to plant a church, and, man, church planting is hard. Like, I give you props for, being a part of that, young church in Phoenix and kind of seeing really, I mean, the nuts and bolts at a year in. It's just so different than an established church, and church planting downtown Nashville. It was hard ground, and we just didn't see a ton of fruit in our natural eyes, just not a lot of people coming, over the 5 years. I don't know how many people, every person matters, every story matters, but you just kind of in your mind, you're like, God, are what we doing, is this making a difference? Then I juxtapose that with seasons in my life where, maybe I was touring and I was out, in clubs and bars, playing songs, obviously like kind of with a spiritual undertone, but I'm hanging out with unbelievers. I'm hanging out with people that aren't in church. I'm hanging out with people that don't know Jesus. And you're having these conversations where it's like, this is crazy what they're willing to tell me. I remember even driving Lyft for a little while, and people would get in the car and just unload these stories. I guess they thought it was free therapy or something. I don't know. But, they would just tell me. And at the end of every Lyft ride, Maribeth, I would say, hey, is it all right if I pray for you? And some of those moments were and will always be the most precious ministry moments of my life. And I wasn't in church. I wasn't on stage. I wasn't leading a song. So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing today. So Atlanta, you start 22, you go to Phoenix, you're married, 3 kids, and now 4. And how does that lead to where you're at today? And what are you doing today, Maribeth?
Yeah. So we moved from Phoenix back to Atlanta for a year, helped another church plant. Wow. And then my husband took a position here at Gateway Franklin. So we've been in the Franklin, which is Nashville area, for 10 years now. So 10 years.
Wow.
We have our final son here in this area. And really over those last, 10 plus years, I've been doing all the things. So still some worship leading. I've gotten into doing some more speaking, business consulting, and doing some real estate investing. So I'm doing multiple things, even right now, as well as I actually lead our women's ministry at Gateway.
So cool.
And so I'm doing a bunch of different things, I guess you could say. But what I've really found is that for years, Kurtis, I prayed, God, please just let me do one or the other. Either let me do business and just do that, or let me do ministry and let me do that. And he never has answered that prayer in the way that I thought. It's always just been, no, I need you to kind of do both. And some of that is, ministry alongside my husband and things he's doing as an executive pastor. And some of that is continuing to lead worship. And I know, Kurtis, one thing that I shared with you is there was a time when, I was doing a little more speaking and I was doing a little more business consulting. It was like heavier on that end versus what I was doing in worship. And I was really grieving like my skill set and the amount I was able to use my voice and some of those things. And I felt like the Lord said to me, Maribeth, your voice is louder now than it's ever been.
Wow.
And, and that to me, I was like, what do you even mean? Like, but maybe it's not how I feel like using my, like just kind of the complaining that we do with the Lord. And yet I just think he was just like, no, this is what you're doing right now. And you're speaking for me wherever it is that you are. And so this whole season has sort of looked like that. It's been sometimes messy. It's been grieving, not being on staff, not some of those things that I loved and I really kind of clung to as an identity. But also saying yes, when he's asking for things, as it relates to worship leading. So.
Wow. Now, let me take you back a little bit. So one of the fun things, and we were talking a little bit before we hit record, is your sister is Chrissy Nordoff. We've had her on the podcast. I've gotten a chance to write with her. She's such a blessing to the kingdom. And you guys together, we're doing this thing called Brave Worship. And I just kind of want to like maybe some nuggets that you took from that era. You talked a little bit about your early on story, like, at 22 in Atlanta, not a lot of women worship pastors. And one thing I loved about Brave, and I had a bunch of friends that were involved in it and are still involved in it in some form or fashion. And, just this idea of like equipping women for worship, to be the leaders that God called them. Maybe just encourage some of our female listeners right now with just, if we have a younger lady who's like, man, I want to jump into that, but I just feel afraid of that world. Like, what is some advice that you could give them, Maribeth, as somebody who has not just walked those waters, but walked many different paths in leadership in different sectors?
Yeah. So when we first moved here, Chrissy and I were just collaborating a lot and realizing, so she is a songwriter. She was in the songwriter world, and there was just not a lot of women mentoring, having a lot of success in that world. It was just kind of a tough place. And I'm coming from the, worship leading world where I was like, same, like there's just not a lot of people offering support or help. And so we at the kitchen table just sat down and came up with Brave Worship. And we said, let's do that. Like, we have two areas of sort of expertise we can speak into here. And let's bring in women, any women that are in some kind of music ministry, some kind of, church ministry that involves music, any of those things. And let's just start this thing. And so we just like started it. And we had a podcast that ended up being pretty successful. We had an online community. So we did like weekly coffees with everybody and kind of brought them, to the table together. We did a couple conferences, just several things to be able to build into women. And, my sister says it best. Being in Nashville, prayed for, I think, about 15 years for God to give her a mentor. And she was frustrated and like, God, why didn't you do it? It's been 15 years. And he said, be what you need. And so she really started to mentor songwriters, even before we started Brave Worship, just in a smaller group, and one-on-one. And so it just kind of birthed this really cool ministry. And the spinoff from Brave Worship, because I stepped out of that on a day-to-day basis several years ago, but is writing worship. And so there's a course that goes with that continues to mentor songwriters. They continue to do retreats, events, all those kinds of things that you can plug into, if you're looking for that connection. And that's actually men and women that are involved in writing worship.
Yeah, I've got the book. It's a great book. I mean, the songwriter profiles and just kind of discovering how you can get started no matter where you're at. But, it's so interesting, like, that you guys would take that step, because there's such a huge need for that. I mean, my daughter, she's 13. She's playing bass. She loves worship. And, obviously as a dad, my hope for her is like there's many opportunities in and out of the church to do not just music, but ministry and leadership. And talk to us a little bit about what are the biggest things that you saw as you guys were mentoring women in worship, as you were mentoring younger leaders of all different ages. What were kind of some of those common threads that you saw that you really needed to speak into, whether it was just some issues that people were battling with or common obstacles that they face?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one that stands out immediately is confidence in their leadership and where God put them, and especially as it relates to females, because that's tough. Like I remember at 22 putting together a band practice, and the guy that was playing guitar and singing was a VP by day, at his office job. And I got another guy that's a business owner, and you have these really strong other personalities in the room, and you're 22 and you have to step into those moments. And I mean, for me, that goes back to having great mentorship that would say like, hey, no matter what, always like find something in the song that you want to not pick apart, but just like, hey, let's tweak this, let's do this. And showing me what it looks like in small ways to begin to lead these people where you might otherwise feel insecure. So a lot of it was that. I mean, so many conversations with women reaching out to me and saying, I can't get my team to listen to me, or, I'm struggling because I have really big opinions, just those kinds of things, and walking through. And really, Kurtis, it's just leadership principles. It's teaching them what it looks like to lead, which there's always going to be another strong opinion in the room, right? There's always going to be pushback. There's always going to be multiple factors that you're considering as you lead, whether it's on the fly in a worship set, right? Or it's behind the scenes. So, well,
let's dive into that. I mean, I love that you just brought that up. There's always going to be pushback. There's always going to be opposition. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you, in those environments where it's team and it's collaboration, how do you put aside ego and deal with pushback or other opinions, or even when it comes to confrontation? Like, how do you deal with opposition?
That's such a hard one. Like, just this lady flashed in front of me right when you said that like auditioned for the worship team that I had to turn down, like just some of that stuff that's so hard. And I remember with her, I was like, all right, here's some things I want you to work on. I think she was quite a bit older. She was maybe 80. I was like, all right, here's some things I want you to work on before you come back, and but you deal with it case by case. That's what you do, right? And I think you've got to go into stuff, hearing people, hearing their concerns, but you have to know when it's time to shut it down and change the conversation. Like, I hear you
That's
all,
so good.
And I hear what you're saying. I appreciate it so much, but here's the decision I'm making. And some of it is in the language that you're using as a leader. You've got to take that posture humbly, but you've got to take that posture in order to continue to move things forward, or you get bulldozed or you end up, you're not holding down the vision that God gave you, for that ministry or that endeavor. So.
Wow, that's great. I love that answer. Like, be confident, listen, but don't steer away. Don't, compromise, because God has given leaders visions, and you got to stick to your guns, because I think, if you don't set culture, somebody will. If you don't, lay down the vision, somebody will. I think one of the things that I saw in your bio was just this love and passion and expertise in culture creation or curation, culture curation. Talk to me about that. Unpack that a little bit, because culture is something that we talk a lot about in church world and in worship world. And I know it's just as huge of a part in the business world. Everything has a culture. What does it mean to curate culture, Maribeth?
Yeah, great question. And I love how you said it, Kurtis. I think if you're not creating it, somebody else will, and same thing with leadership. It's like, if you're not leading, you're being led. Like, those are the two options. But as it relates to culture, and I'll just give a business example, if that's okay. I did a corporate turnaround a couple years ago, a huge organization. It was hospitality and corporate, real estate. Okay. Commercial real estate. Sorry.
Okay.
And so huge. We had 10,000 plus employees, and my job was to come in and fix the culture, and to work on the culture. And I'll just tell you, they had in place a great mission statement. They had a nice logo. Like some of that stuff was already done. I didn't have to worry about that stuff. But the problem was that culture was not then translating to these 10,000 employees and, hundreds of stores all over the country. And here's the deal. Like we can put that little plaque on the wall, and as we should, we need to have that in front of us. But if our teams are not duplicating that same culture, then like, why are we even doing it? And so it's one of those things where you've got to say the vision, you got to say who you want to be as a people, and then you've got to say it again, and you got to say it again. And it's easy, to think, oh, that's for big organizations. That's for like when you have this pretty packaged thing, but it's not. Like this is what you have to do when you have a worship team of 3 or of 10 or of however many, and you get together with those people. And you need to say pretty much every time you get together, hey, we are a team who, and whatever that is, we are a team who put people first in this room. Wow. We are a team who values the moments at the altar more than that big opener that we're going to do that's so impressive. We are like almost like what I recommend is putting together like that as a value statement, which I've done for many of my teams in the past. Like, here's who we are. And we read this and we talk about it and we remind ourselves and we hold each other accountable to that. Because if we don't, it's just not going to happen because it's lofty, right? The things we want to be are lofty and we got to keep stretching, keep reaching for them.
I love that, Maribeth. And I think you're totally right. It's like the moment that we get tired of saying something is when people are just picking it up. And it's like, the fact that, like if you're listening right now and you're a worship leader or you're on a worship team and you've been given a task of like setting culture, whether it's, you're on a full-time position or a volunteer, you've got to set culture. You got to have a culture because if no one knows the culture of an organization, whether it's a team, church, business, they're going to try to figure it out themselves. And oftentimes their conclusion is not your vision. It's going to be something so different. And I've had those seasons, Maribeth, where it's like, man, this is not at all what I pictured in my head it would look like. And a lot of that just comes down to your confidence, but it also comes down to like developing people. And I did want to talk about that because, you mentioned in your story just early on having that mentorship with your pastors and how much that meant to you. Now you're in a role where you're developing people on stage on a Sunday, but throughout the business world in the week. What does that look like? And what are some practical steps for somebody who's listening that's like, man, I've got a team or I've got people that look up to me. And, we were talking about this also before we hit play, like we're in the people business. The kingdom is all about people. Jesus was about people. Ministry is about people. So talk a little bit about people development and how can we do that better?
Yeah, great question. I think, probably most people listening do a couple things. You might have a job and you're in worship or you're serving on a worship team. You might be a full-time, ministry person, but there might be something else that you're dabbling. Like we're in so many spaces. And the key is, yes, we're developing people wherever we go. You can call it discipleship if you want to, like whatever you want to call it.
There you go.
The reality is we're growing people. And I know for me, I had this big aha a few years ago that was like, oh, like I can grow business by growing people. I can grow church by growing people. I can grow this person, help grow them spiritually by investing in them and encouraging them and telling them to get in the word and some of these things. And it was like this aha to me that like, oh, this doesn't just have to happen in some kind of like, curriculum context that's out there. And we can't crack the code on growing somebody. No, this is like life on life, being with people, in those confrontation situations, working through the hard stuff, sticking with them, even when you're so tired of them, like just some of that hard stuff in leadership and in relationship, pushing through those things. Like this is what develops people. And so many times when I've been in a coaching relationship, for example, it really gets good after you walk through something tough with somebody. When you see them go, I want to quit. I hate this, or like, this is so difficult, or you walk through, with a worship team member, a really tough place in life. Maybe they even have to sit out for a while and they come back or whatever that is. And you get to watch them bloom and grow and watch what God can do with somebody who just humbles themselves before him. There's just nothing like it. Like I am like addicted to it. I love seeing people grow and, grow closer to Christ. And sometimes that looks like a tiny bit of openness to hearing about him. And other times it's like, okay, I'm walking with him now and I'm listening to him every day.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, because some of the toughest conversations I've ever had where I walk away and I'm like, I don't know where this one's going. I don't know if they're going to be back on the team. I don't know if they're going to leave the church. I don't know if they hate me and they're going to start leaving. Mm-hmm. Those have actually been some of the most incredible, where you see the fruit. And it comes down to commitment. I think on both sides, right? Where it's like, okay, we're going to have a tough conversation right now. This is because I love you. I'm for you. I see the best in you. And actually, I just had one of these conversations a couple weeks ago. And, you know, I'm thinking in my head, oh, this is not going to go good. And I saw this person on Sunday in worship, tears pouring down their face, came up to me after the service on stage, and I just prayed with them, and we walked through another conversation, and it was so healing. It was so healing. And I think, you know, one of the things that we overread in the book of James, you know, it's like forgiveness comes from God, but healing, and this is so key, confess to one another and be healed. It's just this interesting thought. And theologies go maybe, you know, I don't know. I'm not going to get super deep on like Hebrew and Greek context and everything like that. But it's just this idea of like, I think we've lost the willingness to confess to one another. And it doesn't necessarily mean this is what I did bad this weekend. This is how I sinned. And this is how, but confession is so much bigger than that. I think it's like confessing your hangups and confessing your thought processes and say, hey, would you have a little bit of grace for me here because I'm going through this or that? And I think, you know, something that I'm picking up even in this conversation with you is that you have this spirit about you where it's like, I'm just here to hear you out and to see how you can grow and how I can grow. And like, I think that's what makes you a great leader. And, you know, talk to us a little bit about that, where like you're on the other side of the desk, you're on the other side of the conversation, and you're called to lead this person. What are some of the ways that, without assuming, that we just, I guess the spirit of invitation is what I'm getting to. Like, how do you live with that spirit of invitation? Because you clearly have it, and it's what's I think God has breathed on in all of these different seasons of your life. Is you just have a spirit of invitation. I don't even know if like anybody's ever said that to you, but I just sense that with you. Like, what is that, and how can we be greater at that, Maribeth? It's what Jesus had.
Yeah, I think. I just keep thinking realness, Kurtis. I keep thinking like, and it's something I just want to continue to grow in. I don't think it's always been my biggest strength, and I want to keep growing in that. And I think some of that is, I've learned a ton from my coach and counselor. And one of the things I've learned is that we've got to feel our feelings. We got to tell the truth. We got to give it to God. Like, we have to be open to actually that realness that happens in a relationship when we are honest like that. And some of that is honest with the person, but some of it is what they can sense where we are honest with the Lord and we have that relationship, I think. And I think though, when you do those things, I do think that invites people to open up with you. Also how you react to when things go wrong. You know, I'm thinking just about a recent relationship I had, a work relationship where I had somebody that was kind of reporting to me, and, you know, she messed up and it's like, she comes to me so scared, like, oh, I did this thing. And I'm able to be like, no big deal. Like, in the context of everything, this is nothing. Let's figure it out. What's the solution? Let's move forward. And I think in any context, when we're able to sit down with somebody, when they want to come and confess something tough to us, think about what your face is doing. Think about, you know what I mean? Like, just being willing to hear that hard stuff and put yourself in their shoes going, all of us are messing up. Like, maybe mine doesn't look the same, but we're messing up. Like, we're not perfect. And when we continue with that, and we know that we're on this trajectory for growth, all of us, hopefully, wherever we are, I don't know, it's just a little easier, I think, to receive that, and hopefully for people to open up and feel like they can approach us, you know?
Wow. I think, you know, I'm just thinking of so many conversations, and like, watch your reaction, watch your face, because that's so key on like the future of a relationship. Like if somebody comes the first time and they're like, hey, I'm struggling with this, your reaction will determine whether they come back a second time or whether they go find somebody else or just shut down altogether. And I think that's such good advice, especially for anybody who's maybe a younger leader and you're like, I want to be open to growth myself, but also in trust, like for other people. Man, that's so good. Maribeth, I don't know where our time went. Like, how did this conversation fly by? I do want to ask one more question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I love asking this question to every guest on Worshipology. Like, what's the Holy Spirit speaking to you right now? What's just kind of like in your prayer life or as you open scripture? What is the Lord just kind of highlighting in this season right now?
Man, just reading through Chronicles right now, I love the Old Testament. I just keep being drawn back to it, but reading about this King Asa, and how he walked with the Lord and, God said, like, when you're with me, I'm with you. And like, just had this great promise from God and had this wonderful like career as a king. And then all of a sudden there was like a turning point where he just kind of turned away. He like took the treasure out of the temple and like took matters into his own hands and then kind of got bitter to the rest of his life. And so what's been on my mind is just like finishing strong and how few leaders are actually doing that and actually finishing strong and how important I think that is. I think that, wherever you are when you're listening, some of you are young leaders, some of you are farther down the path, but I want to encourage you to stay in it and don't get weary. Stay close to the Lord. If there's one thing I wish I could go back and tell myself at 22, it would be spend twice as much time in the Word, spend twice as much time with the Lord outside of that stage than you do on that stage, or more. Daily, like invest that time, stay with him, because when you are with him, he is with you. And that is all we need. That is all we need. And so, that's what's been on my mind is like, sometimes I'm tired, I'm weary in leadership, but it's not time to stop. It's time to just dig in and stay strong. So that's what's been hanging in my mind.
Wow, I love that. And, not a lot of times people are going to reference King Asa. So props on that one. I just think, he's one of those like kings that you just kind of glance by. But I think that's so key is, stay strong. Don't grow weary, for in due season you will reap a harvest if you don't give up. And that's a word for anyone listening. Maribeth, you are a joy, a treasure, and a gift to the kingdom. And I'm just grateful that we got to spend some time. We're going to put some links on how you can connect with Maribeth and see all the things that she's doing. And thanks for spending some time with us on Worshipology.
Oh, thank you, Kurtis. It was amazing. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks. Visit kurtisparks.com to learn more and check out Kurtis's books and resources for worship leaders and teams. This episode is brought to you by Crossway, publisher of the Sing Hymnal, curated by Keith and Kristen Getty. This hymnal hosts a collection of timeless classic and contemporary hymns, created to deepen corporate worship, liturgical readings, psalms paired with popular hymns, and stories about each hymn, along with the durable, scuff-resistant cover and sewn binding, make this resource perfect for frequent use in church services. Visit crossway.org/churchworship to learn how to get up to 60% off case quantities of the hymnal with a free Crossway Plus account. Worshipology is part of the Worship Leader Magazine podcast network, brought to you by Worship Leader Magazine. Today's episode was sponsored by PraiseCharts. Visit PraiseCharts.com and get everything you need for your worship team today.